Well, good morning. Happy New Year. Can you believe that this last year is done, right? I don't know. I think the older I get, the more I sound like my parents, you're just like, it's going so fast and what's happening? And then it's not just that this last year is past. We just went through an entire decade. I mean, this is the start of a new decade. And I was thinking back on this past decade, just this last week, and I'm like, all right, well, how would I describe the last 10 years? And that's a pretty tall order to try to describe the last 10 years in 10 phrases or 10 sentences or 10 words, but I sort of came up with a little list. This is how I would describe things that sort of popped out in this last decade, and see if maybe this resonates with you a little bit. The first thing, how I would describe this last decade in a word is hashtag. Yeah? Who used hashtag before 2010, right? Hashtag was that thing on your push button phone that you hit. Never. Number 2, social media and influencers. I mean, really? 10 years ago, to think about an influencer, somebody that went on YouTube and made a living just talking about absolutely nothing? It's amazing. Number 3, fidget spinners. Sorry, I just have kids. I couldn't leave that off. If you don't know what a fidget spinner is, don't go look it up. They made me miserable forever. Number 4, going viral, right? Before this last decade, going viral meant you got sick and you're going to die, right? Number 5, I think this last decade was the decade of the hipsters, which if you don't know what a hipster is, it's what my 16-year-old son says I'm trying to be. Number 6, emojis, right? We now communicate with pictures, that's it. I mean, literally, I'll send my son, that same son, a text, and all I get is a thumb or a smile face or other not so nice stickers. Number 7, selfies. Used to be that you would get someone to take the picture for you. You would interrupt them, but now you don't do that. You take a picture of yourself, and now our phones have big lenses on it so that you can get everybody in the selfie. Number 8, Netflix and streaming. Do you remember when Netflix, before the decade came and it was actual, DVDs, and you'd order them in the mail and they'd send them to you and then you'd put them back in the mail? Not anymore. It's all streaming. Number 9, I just feel like this is probably, again, a byproduct of having children in my house. I feel like this last decade was the decade of superhero movies. Does it feel like that's the only thing that gets made these days? And then lastly, and more seriously, I feel like this last decade, more than any other decade that I remember, as we enter this new one, we're kind of on this precipice of leaving behind what was and looking forward to what is. It does feel like we walked out of a decade that, although it had immense possibility and things change so rapidly, it feels like we're more insecure and unstable and unsure than we've ever been. Does it feel that way to you? Things feel a little bit unstable, just not right in the world. And I've been thinking about that a lot. There was so much promise in this last decade, and yet as we move into this next, there is this sense of man, so much has changed, and it's changed so fast. Literally, guys, when I was in high school, to think about what high schoolers deal with now, you couldn't have dreamt that up, right? It's even more grand than the Jetsons. What our kids deal with, what we deal with, the rapid pace of change has created not only some optimism, but I think an immense amount of insecurity, because things are rapidly moving so fast, and it makes you think, where do I stand in all of this? Where does the church stand in all this? With all this changing, what does Jesus' message mean today? Because I think we're faced with this reality that we have to come to grips with. This is where we live, and that ain't going to change. And so where does Jesus' message fit in our lives in this insecure, unpredictable time? Well, we're going to spend the next 5 to 6 weeks in a brand new teaching series. And it's all live teaching. It's going to be me and Steve Carter that are going to dive into some of this, just looking at Jesus. In fact, Steve's message next week, it is so perfect. It's called The Age of Outrage, where we're going to look at this this contentious world that we live in that just seems to be yelling all the time. You don't want to miss it, but I don't think you're going to want to miss any of this series, because we're going to dive into this reality of what does it look like to sit at Jesus' table these days. That's sort of the metaphor that we're using for this entire series. What does it look to sit at his table? What is he calling us to do? Oftentimes when you look in the Bible, Jesus, he would use meals to engage people and to teach important lessons. This is what he did. And I think he continues, even in this day and age, to call us to eat with him and to learn from him. And so what do we need to learn in this day and age? Who gets to sit at his table? And how big is God's table? Who belongs there? What does he teach us? It's about tables. And I think if we can really settle in for the next 6 weeks, that we don't just enter into the decade or into this next year, but we enter into the decade understanding what is life with Jesus supposed to look like. So will you pray with me as we dive into part 1 of this series? Come to the table. God, speak to us in these uncertain times about the reality of what it means to walk with you and how I believe we need you more than ever these days. In Jesus' name, amen. Now, tables are pretty awesome. I know they seem pretty rudimentary. We see them all the time. But if you think about it, some of the most significant things that happen in your life happen at tables. And remember, we eat 3 meals a day. And most of the time we sit at tables when we eat those meals. That's 1,095 meals in any given year that we sit around a table. And oftentimes we're not eating alone. When we sit at a table, we're with a coworker, or we're with our spouse, or we're with our family. We're with friends. I think about any time we have small group at our house. We have a small group that meets at our house on Wednesdays, and we meet around food. It just naturally gravitates to the table. You think about game night, what happens with your family. So many significant moments, not just in Jesus' world, in our life, they happen at these tables, right? You can think about all the different kinds of tables, dinner tables, game night tables, wedding tables. I've been thinking a lot about wedding tables these days. You've been to weddings, right? You can't have a wedding without a wedding table. One, that's where all the gifts go. But the truth is, we all go to weddings and we enjoy the ceremony, but then we go off and we share a meal. The whole thing is around this bride and this groom that sits with their party and we celebrate them. And weddings for me have been I've had such an interesting relationship with weddings most of my life. As you know, I'm a pastor. And so one of the things that I do regularly are weddings. I've been doing weddings for 25 years. There's lots of people probably in this room that I did your wedding. Well, my daughter Daly was born here in Rockford, August 26, 1997. Okay, so this was a long time ago. And it's almost like when Daly was born, my relationship with weddings began to change. Because before that, weddings was something that I went to, that I enjoyed, that I celebrated. But after Daly was born, and this is no joke, this is not hyperbole, I'm not exaggerating. I don't think there has been one wedding that I've ever gone to since 1997 where I didn't cry pretty significantly when the bride walked down the aisle. Now, most of the people probably thought, how sweet, he must really care for this couple. But the truth is that I have always, since the day Daly was born, always dreaded the moment that Daly got married. I've been thinking about this since she was little. My wife, I drive her crazy at weddings. She's like, seriously, bro, you were totally embarrassing me. You don't even know them and you're crying. I'm like, just stop. She's like, Daly's 3, get over it. So I've been dreading this moment. Like in my heart, I'm like, I dreading this moment. Well, Daly went off to school in California. She went to Westmont about 4 years ago. And she started volunteering at a church that was just south of Santa Barbara. And that church is a church called Mission Church. Now, you may not know this, but you had a significant role in that church. In fact, the 3 couples that went to plant this church about 8 years ago, they're Heartland people. That you did that. That's really neat. There's a bunch of people that are coming to Jesus in Ventura, and that is, you get to be a part of that. Well, Daly started volunteering at this church. It's with the Hickersons and the Sheldons and the Oaks. And she would drive back and forth. Well, she came home last Christmas and said, it was last Christmas, I guess, Dad, there's this really great guy. He's a youth pastor there. And I'm like, you stay away from youth pastors. She said, Dad, he's really great. I'm like, all right, Daly. As the relationship sort of went on, she said, this was last summer, so it was the Christmas before that summer. She said, Dad, she called me in like March. She said, things are going really well. Do you mind if Taylor comes down and goes on vacation with us? Well, we vacation down in Florida. And I'm like, yeah, sure, that sounds great. So they flew in, and what a great guy. What a great kid. I enjoyed all week long with him, but something strange started happening on the last day that they were there. I got up pretty early, and I walked downstairs to get my coffee. I typically, when I'm on vacation, I like to read, I read the same things, historical fiction. I'm such a nerd. I look forward to vacation time. I'm reading my historical fiction. I get up early, and Taylor's up, and he's down there. It looks like he's been up for a while, right? His hair's kind of messed up. And I'm like, oh, hey, how are you? And he's like, good, good. And he seemed real jittery. Like, he was going to go do a bank robbery or something. He didn't seem right. So I got my coffee, and he followed me into the kitchen and didn't say anything. Then I'm like, well, maybe he's going to rob me. I don't know. Walked back out into the living room. He followed me out there, followed me into the porch. Then he sat down across from me. And at that point, I figured something was up. He wanted to have a talk, although no words were coming out of his mouth. He was just looking at me. I said, can I help you with something? He said, listen, I love your daughter a ton. And I was like, no. I'm on vacation. He's like, he began to explain to me how much he loved her and how great she is. And he couldn't imagine spending his life with anyone else. And it was the most amazing moment. This kid begins to tell me what life would look like with Daly. And then he did what I knew was coming. He asked me for Daly's hand. I remember looking back at him, and I was like, after hearing this amazing speech, he'd really thought about it. I was like, of course not. No. He asked for Daly's hand, and this May, they got married in California. Now, it was amazing. The wedding was amazing. Chrissy and Daly, they did such a great job. They were married in this avocado farm, lemon farm, and all of our friends from Colorado, from here in Rockford, from California, they were there to celebrate this amazing day, this day that I tried so hard to hold it together. I couldn't. I cried like a baby most of the day, and it was one of those moments where it was beautiful. And someone said, how do you feel? I said, you know how I feel? I feel like, have you ever read a really great book, and when it's over, you can't go read it again, and you're so sad that it's over, but you're so glad that you read it? I said, that's what it feels like for me. This was the best 22 years. But I'm so grateful that she loves Jesus, that she's serving him, that she's married to a guy who will be better to her than me. Like, that's the dream. And that moment, that wedding, although I had been dreading, for 22 years, this moment, it was beautiful. It was this beautiful moment. And I think this is what weddings are oftentimes to those that are deeply involved in the wedding. And I think it speaks to a really important moment in Jesus' ministry. I think it's actually a moment in Jesus' ministry that oftentimes is misunderstood and overlooked. It's the start of Jesus' ministry. Now, we know that when Jesus starts his ministry, he starts it at a wedding. Now, weddings in Jesus' day were a little bit different. We had a wedding. It was a ton of work. If you've ever been a part of a wedding, you've planned a wedding, it's a lot of work. But in Jesus' day, it wasn't a one-day ceremony. Oftentimes, it would be a week-long deal. Weddings were really big deals, and it sort of worked like this. Weddings would start when the bridegroom arrived at the bride's house, and he would bring his wedding party. Like, all his buddies came with him. And the bridegroom and the bride they were crowned, because this is going to be a one-week celebration where they are king and queen for the week. Then the bridegroom would walk back to his house with the bride, and the dad would light the way. And once they arrived, the party would start. Now, these would be 7-day parties, just food and celebration for this life. And this is where Jesus was when we find him in John chapter 2. Now, a little bit of rewind so that you know what Jesus has just faced. In the last short amount of time, Jesus has been baptized. We know that before this wedding. We know that he just spent 40 days out in the wilderness. He's been tempted by Satan. It has been exhausting. He's come back and he's gathered up all his disciples. Like, he's gearing up for what comes next, like his public ministry. And it seems to me that Jesus came to the wedding with his buddies, with his disciples, for a little bit of rest and relaxation. Like 7 days, a party for 7 days where we can hang out, and then we'll see what God's up to. Here, we'll see what I'm going to do. We're going to see what my Father has for me after the wedding. That's the way it seems based on the text. Now, let me read the text to you. It says, the next day, Jesus' mother, so Jesus' mom was there at the wedding as well, was a guest at the wedding celebration in the village of Cana in Galilee. Jesus and his disciples, they were also invited to the celebration. The wine supply ran out during the festivities, so Jesus' mother spoke to him about the problem. Now, let me pause there for a second. If you've hosted anybody at your house, you know that it's kind of embarrassing to run out of food. If hosting is in your blood, and some of you have it. Some of you, man, hosting people at your house, this is what you do. You never run out of food, right? Just a simple party. Chrissy's mom, she's so sweet. She had all of the family over, and we were talking about this because I love hosting people in our house. I love it. It's one of my favorite things to do. We had a bunch of family members over, and she ordered so much food that there were she ordered Lino's Pizza, which, by the way, guys, why don't they start one of those in Colorado? They would make a gazillion dollars. We always get Lino's. She brought in all this Lino's. There were like 6 pizzas left over, and we talked about this. We're like, you never want to run out of food when people come to your house. That just feels awful. Now, imagine a wedding, especially in Jesus' day. This would be like such an embarrassment, such a social faux pas, not to mention, these are small communities. These people live together. They'd talk about this. They'd have nothing else to talk about for the next 6 months but the fact that they ran out of wine halfway through the wedding, right? It was awful, and it was embarrassing, so much so that Jesus' mom comes to him to say, Jesus, we have a problem. She says, they have no more wine, she told them. Now, I deduce from what Jesus says next that he didn't think this was his problem. Because he says, how does that concern you? And how does that concern me? Right? Mom, that's fine. Not my wedding. We're not particularly close. It's not my thing. It's not your thing. And then Jesus' mom does what moms do when they really want you to do something, even when you don't want to do it. She says this, it's so great, because Jesus says, look, Mom, it doesn't concern me. My time hasn't come. Now, let me pause before I get to that. What Jesus is saying to his mom is he's going, listen, once we start this, the clock starts ticking towards the cross, right? So once I start doing miracles, the clock is ticking, and my time hasn't come yet. This sort of foreshadows what he does at the Garden of Gethsemane, right? When he says, God, if you could take this cup from me. He says, my time hasn't come yet. I don't want to start this march toward the cross quite yet. And then Jesus' mom, she doesn't look back to him and argue. She looks at the servants and says, just do whatever he tells you to do. She knew he was gonna do something, even if he was arguing with his mom. You know, I thought about this first miracle because Jesus does step in. And he does instruct the servants, and he does turn water into wine for this wedding ceremony. I was thinking about firsts. I was thinking about Jesus' first miracle, but I got to thinking about firsts in general. Firsts matter to us, don't they, a little bit? If you think about firsts in your life, oftentimes they stick in your mind. Like, you know, you remember when you look at your children, their first steps, all their little firsts, like you mark them down in books. Well, you do with the first child, but by the time you get to the third child, you're like, I've already seen it. But you remember your first too. You remember things like I do, at least. I remember my first elementary school where I went to school. I remember my first crush in second grade. I remember my first job in Chandler, Texas at Food Fair. I remember my first car. How many of you, by a show of hands, remember your first car? How many of you? See? Like we remember these things, these firsts, they say something, they matter to us. We hold on to them. And I thought about Jesus' first miracle. That's what this is. And on the surface, like if we just have a moment to look at it, on the surface, you have to wonder, is it the best way to kick off your ministry? Like water into wine. It was a miracle, no doubt. I'm not saying it wasn't a miracle, but you know that Jesus does over 40 miracles. There are 40 miracles that are documented in the Gospels, over 40. And you could make the argument that of the 40 miracles that he does in the Gospels, this, his very first one, the beginning of his ministry, when he steps out and says, I am the Messiah, is the least impressive. I mean, he didn't, in this miracle, heal a leper. He would. Doesn't heal a paralyzed man or a blind man or a cripple or someone with a withered hand, although he would. He didn't raise anyone from the dead, although he would. Doesn't calm a stormy sea. I mean, even once he caught a fish that had a coin in its mouth and looked at a withered tree once and made it stand up. It's not even those things. On the surface, if we're honest, compared to the 40 things that Jesus does, the capacity he had, this miracle seems not particularly grand. And it's really, if you look at the setting, not a particularly grand stage either. This wasn't when he preached the Sermon on the Mount. It wasn't one of his gatherings where 5,000 people came, which, by the way, he did another impressive miracle. He fed them with a few loaves and fishes. This wasn't a particularly grand miracle on the surface. And it wasn't a particularly grand stage. I mean, listen, weddings happen all the time. You know, like this next year, there will be 2.2 million weddings in the United States. Right here in Illinois, there's going to be somewhere around 50,000 weddings. How many weddings have you been to in your life? Look, let's just be real with each other. There are often times when you just don't really want to go to that wedding. You know them, but you know what you're going to do. You're going to sit through a 30-minute ceremony, and then you're going to go and have some food that maybe you don't really even like because you didn't get your order in time, and instead they're going to give you a vegetarian plate instead of meat, and you really wanted meat, right? You're like, I don't really dance. I just want to not do this. Weddings, they happen all the time. Jesus' first miracle isn't him saving anyone or healing anyone. He just turns water into wine. And on the surface, it's not a particularly grand miracle. It's not a particularly grand stage. I wonder why Jesus did that. I mean, don't you read stuff in the Bible sometimes and you go, okay, well, why? I mean, when I read this, I've read it a million times, I got to thinking, why would Jesus do that then? Like, this is the Messiah. Guys, this is Jesus. He is starting his ministry. Why? Well, one thing struck me for sure, that I shouldn't be surprised that he did do it, for two very particular reasons. Number one, I didn't read it in this translation, but if you read the NIV, this is the way the NIV reads about this moment. It's John 2:1. Let me read it to you. It says, on the third day, a wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. Now, it was a third day moment. Now, just so we're clear, anytime you see day 3 in the Bible, this is foreshadowing something's about to happen. Third days represent something pretty significant. The Apostle Paul puts it this way in 1 Corinthians 15:3-4. He says, for what I received, I passed on to you as of first importance, that Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, that he was buried, and that he was raised on the third day according to Scripture. Now, it turns out in the Bible, especially in the Old Testament, it is filled with these third day stories. Things really important happen on third days, like in Genesis 42. Joseph's brothers, they were put into prison, and then they were released on the third day. Joshua chapter 2, the Israelite spies were told by Rahab to hide for 3 days. In Esther chapter 5, Esther prays, and she fasts for 3 days, and then the king receives her favorably, right? Genesis chapter 22, Abraham's afraid that he's going to have to sacrifice his son, but it's on the third day that he looks up and he sees the sacrifice that will save his son. Hosea 6 puts it this way, come, let us return to the Lord. After 2 days, he'll revive us, but on the third day, he'll restore us. So this was day 3. Shouldn't have been surprised to me that Jesus acted. But there's something else going on in the story that if you take a moment and dig deeper, it tells us a lot about Jesus. Because it's true on the surface. It's not a particularly grand miracle. It's not a particularly grand stage. We don't even know Jesus' particular relationship with this couple. But here's what we do know. Here's what I can tell you, that while many of us, most of us, if we're really honest, most weddings we don't want to be at. Most weddings aren't particularly important to us. But there is one wedding that is, and it's yours. In fact, if you've been married, I'm guessing if I ask you, give me the 3 most important days in your life, I bet if you're married, you list your wedding day as one of those 3. I know I do. See, wedding days for everybody else in the crowd, But wedding days for Daly and Taylor, that wedding day, May 11th this year, that will go down as one of their top 3 moments of their entire existence. There were 2 people in this moment that this was a grand stage. And this was a grand miracle. You see, sometimes I think that we don't see Jesus' compassion for what it is. We understand healing someone with some sort of problem in their body, right? When you see someone who has been devoured by leprosy or hand is withered or who has died, we get it, right? Jesus, compassion on full display. But there's something here, the very first miracle, that says a lot about what it means for us to come to his table, who he is, and what his compassion is. Now, you know that the word for compassion in the Greek is splanchnizomai. And if you were to translate that, what it actually means is like a burning in your guts. You ever seen something like that just bothered you so much it made you sick to your stomach? You know what I mean? Like you see something, an injustice, like a moment. I had one of these moments. It was actually at O'Hare. And I'm not like this. Listen, when I go on airplanes, like this afternoon I'm going to get on an airplane, I am the mind my own business guy. I'm not the guy that sits next to you and just chats it up. I just don't. It's not in my personality. And I send all the signals to the world. I'm not the guy who's going to talk to you, right? I put on my Bose headphones and I pull out my computer or my book and I just mind my own business. That's sort of my MO. When I get to the airport, it's like I'm going to go there. I'm going to probably get 2 cheeseburgers real quick at the Billy Goat's Tavern, and then I'm going to go get on the airplane. That's what I'm going to do. Well, this one afternoon I was walking up the jet bridge, and there was a fellow that was in front of me, and you could tell that he had a hearing implant, like he had a disability. He couldn't hear right. And he was in front of me, and they call the numbers. You know how they do these days, 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, they had called the number, and he came up with his ticket, and he was in the wrong number line. He wasn't supposed to be boarding in front of me. Well, I don't know if this lady had a bad day or if, what it was, but she absolutely tore into him about being in the wrong line. And listen, I'm not exaggerating because honestly, I don't want to get involved. I don't want to have to think about it. But she's so mean to him, and it's so obvious that he can't hear what she's saying that he finally moves off to the side. I give her my ticket, and I'm walking down the jet bridge, and something happened inside me. It was more than sick to my stomach. I started with sick to my stomach. Then I got mad. Then it turned into like holy indignation. I'm like, I cannot believe it. I get all the way to the plane, and I'm like, nope. I walk back out the jet bridge. I go over to the lady. I walk back out. She goes, "Can I help you, sir?" I said, "I just watched what you did to that man. And can I tell you that as a fellow human being, that was absolutely wrong. You should be ashamed of yourself. I don't know how bad your day was, but what you just did, you can't do that to human beings. Stop it or go work somewhere else." I don't know. And then I walked off, and I'm like you. I wish I were like, yes. Then I feel bad about all the things I said. Then I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm a pastor. What did I do? They probably have it on film. See, Jesus had these moments, holy indignation. And the way that the English dictionary says this, it says that he would have this deep awareness of suffering for others, and he had it coupled with a desire to relieve it. This is what Jesus was. And I got to thinking about this first miracle, about this moment that Jesus hears his mom and says, listen, these two, their most important day, it will be ruined, Jesus. And then I imagine this Jesus that I know, filled with compassion, that he can't sit still, looks across the room and he sees a bride, like daily. And he sees that, and his heart is broken because he's like, this is one of 3 most important days of her life. And then he's like, then he sees the groom, and he's devastated. He's so embarrassed. It's awful. And something happens in Jesus. And he walks over, and he does what only Jesus can do. He not only turns the water into wine, the Bible tells us he turns it into like A-list wine. Because the master of ceremonies comes and says, usually people serve the best wine first, right? Because by day 3, nobody cares. Jesus turns it into the best wine. See, this is what you have to know about Jesus' table. Jesus cares about those kinds of things. See, Jesus cares about those kinds of moments. Moments to the rest of the audience, the rest of the crowd. Was it a grand stage to them? No. Was it a grand moment to them? No. Was it of significant importance to those two? Absolutely. And that's what Jesus did. That's who he is. See, this is why I say to you all the time, guys, this place, this Jesus that we follow, he gives us a pretty good model of what it looks like to be filled with compassion. We are not a place of a bunch of people who have it figured out. We are a place, me included, of people who are broken and who feel like just little old me's, who really, our problems Jesus couldn't be interested in. We're that place. If that's you, this is your home. This is what we want to be. Is a place that knows there is this Jesus that does love us. And listen, some of you walk in this room and you've really begun to believe that Jesus doesn't see you anymore, that he's forgotten about you, that he doesn't care about your problems. They're too small, they're too insignificant, or maybe they're too big. Maybe you have to get it all put together, and then you can come see Jesus. And this first miracle says, oh, you think you're forgotten? You think you're little? Then you have a seat at his table. He hasn't forgotten you. He cares about the fact that your marriage feels broken, that your heart is broken this Christmas and New Year's season because of a relationship, because you don't know how you're going to pay your mortgage. See, the truth is, I think Jesus is more relevant today than ever. Because the truth is, we have a world filled with a bunch of people like you and me who just sometimes feel like forgotten. Nobody cares. Nobody's interested. Maybe when I get it together, I can come to church or sit at his table. And in fact, it doesn't work that way. See, maybe your water hasn't turned to wine yet. But I can tell you that if you'll come dine with him, you're with the guy who does that kind of stuff. He turns water into wine. How do I know that Jesus loves you? Because he does this sort of thing. I love the way that 1 John 4:19 says it. He says, we love. In other words, we become whole. Stuff flows out of it. Not because we're perfect, not because we're smart, not because we figured it out. In fact, this little tiny verse says everything you need to know about how you get whole. It isn't go get whole and then come here. We love, we get whole because he first loved us. He loves you. He thinks you're awesome. And there are some of you that have never met this God. That while he's big enough to create the vastness of the universe, that 2,000 years ago he came here. And he's so interested in your life that he turned water into wine, and he did heal blind people, and he did heal the sick, and he did calm the storms. And he did carry your sins to the cross. And he did die and defeat death once and for all. And you know who he did it for? Little old me and little old you. You see, the truth is that this very first miracle paints the picture of a good, good dad. A good, good God who loves little old me. He is a good, good father. And here's what's awesome. Imagine sitting at the table with that guy for the rest of not just this year and not just this decade, but your whole life.